The mare collapsed in the middle of the dusty street, just as the noon sun turned Chloride, Arizona, into a furnace. And while everyone else assumed she'd simply overheated in the brutal June temperatures of 1883, Sarah Jane Morrison knew better the moment she looked into the animal's clouded eyes. She dropped the basket of linens she'd been carrying to the general store and ran toward the fallen horse, her skirts kicking up red dust as men shouted and scattered. Convinced the animal was dying and would need to be put down before she blocked the main thoroughfare completely. Sarah fell to her knees beside the mare's head, ignoring the sharp stones that dug through her petticoats, and pressed her palm against the horse's neck. The pulse was wrong, the breathing shallow but not labored in the way heat exhaustion would cause. She ran her hands along the mare's body with practiced efficiency, feeling for swelling, checking the temperature of her skin, examining her gums and the inside of her eyelids, while the growing crowd muttered about the strange Morrison girl who'd always been too concerned with animals and not enough with finding herself a husband. "Someone fetch Doc Carlyle," a man's voice called out. "Horse needs putting down before she suffers more." "She doesn't need putting down," Sarah said sharply, not looking up from her examination. "She's been poisoned, probably from bad water or contaminated feed. Her pupils are dilated and her heartbeat is irregular. Heat exhaustion wouldn't cause these symptoms together." "What would a woman know about it?" Another voice scoffed. "Girl spends all her time in the stables instead of learning proper domestic skills." Sarah bit back her retort and continued her assessment. She'd learned years ago that arguing with the men in Chloride only wasted breath that could be better spent helping the animals they so frequently misunderstood. Her father had been the town's farrier before his death 2 years prior, and he'd taught her everything he knew about horses from the time she could walk. She had a gift for it, he'd always said, an instinct that went beyond what could be taught. "Move aside, miss." The voice came from directly above her, deep and authoritative but not unkind. "I'm the owner. Let me see her." Sarah looked up and had to shield her eyes against the sun to make out the man's face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of weathered oak. Dust covered his clothes and a bandana hung loose around his neck. She'd never seen him before, which meant he was likely passing through with whatever cattle operation the mare belonged to. "She's been poisoned," Sarah repeated, this time directing her words to him. "Did you stop at Henderson Creek for water this morning?" The man's eyes narrowed, studying her with sudden intensity. "We did. How did you know?" "Because Henderson Creek has been contaminated for 3 weeks now. Runoff from the old copper mine up in the hills. The water looks clear, but it's full of heavy metals. Livestock have been getting sick all month. I've been trying to get the town council to post warnings, but they think I'm being hysterical." The cowboy crouched down beside her, his movements quick and efficient despite his size. He examined the mare himself, checking the same signs Sarah had, and she could tell by the careful way he touched the horse that he actually cared about the animal's welfare. Most men who ran cattle treated horses as disposable tools, but this one's hands were gentle, and his face creased with genuine concern. "What's the treatment?" he asked, looking directly at Sarah with those intense oak-colored eyes. "Activated charcoal if we can get it down her, and clean water with molasses to help flush her system. She'll need to be walked every hour to keep her blood moving, but not in this heat. We need to get her into shade and cool her down slowly while we work on the poisoning." "The doc will know better," someone in the crowd insisted. "He went to medical school back east." "Doc Carlyle is a people doctor," Sarah said, her patience wearing thin, "and he's currently treating the Hendersons for influenza. By the time someone rides out to their ranch and brings him back, this mare will be dead." The The cowboy made his decision quickly. "Tell me what you need." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Someone was actually listening to her. "Help me get her up. We need to move her to the livery stable. It's only 50 yards, but we have to do it now." Together they coaxed the mare to her feet, the cowboy supporting most of the animal's weight while Sarah guided her head. The horse staggered and nearly went down twice, but they managed to get her into the dim coolness of the stable. Sarah's hands moved with swift confidence as she began gathering supplies, calling out instructions that the cowboy followed without question or hesitation. "I'm Vincent Parker," he said as he held the mare's head steady so Sarah could administer the charcoal mixture she'd prepared. "I run cattle between here and New Mexico. This mare is my best cutting horse. Name's Juniper." "Sarah Jane Morrison," she replied, carefully pouring the mixture down Juniper's throat. "I help manage the livery and do veterinary work when needed, which is most of the time since the nearest actual veterinarian is 3 days' ride away in Phoenix. You do this often, treat sick horses." "Whenever I can convince the owners to listen to me instead of assuming a woman couldn't possibly understand animal medicine." Sarah set down the empty bottle and began mixing electrolytes into a bucket of clean water. "My father taught me. He said I had better instincts than any vet he'd ever met." Vincent was quiet for a moment, still holding Juniper's head with steady hands. "How did you know it was poisoning and not heat exhaustion? Most people would have assumed the same thing with temperatures like these." Sarah met his eyes across the mare's neck. Her pupils were the first sign. They were dilated but responsive to light, which meant neurological involvement. Heat exhaustion would cause different pupil responses. Then her heart rate was elevated but irregular, and her gums showed the early signs of poor circulation despite adequate hydration. The combination pointed to toxin exposure, and Henderson Creek is the only contaminated water source in the area right now. "You saw all that in less than a minute." "I see it because I pay attention." Most people look at animals as things instead of living creatures with symptoms that tell a story. She paused, checking Juniper's pulse again. "It's already steadying. The charcoal is binding to the toxins. She'll need careful monitoring for the next 48 hours, but she should recover fully." Vincent released a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you. Juniper's been with me for 6 years. She's saved my life more than once when we've had stampedes or had to cut aggressive bulls from the herd. I can't afford to lose her." Something in his voice made Sarah look up. There was genuine emotion there, not the detached pragmatism most cattlemen showed toward their working animals. "You really care about her." "Of course I do. She's a partner, not just a tool." He ran his hand down Juniper's neck with obvious affection. "Anyone who doesn't respect their animals doesn't deserve to work with them." Sarah felt her opinion of Vincent Parker shift dramatically. In a world where most men viewed horses as disposable equipment, here was someone who actually understood the bond between human and animal. "You should stay in town for a few days. Make sure she's fully recovered before you move on." "I was planning to anyway. My crew is camped about 5 miles south with 200 head of cattle. We're resting them before the push through the desert toward Tucson." He studied Sarah with that same intense focus he'd shown when examining Juniper. "Would you be willing to check on her through the night? I can pay whatever your rate is." "I'll stay with her," Sarah said. "And you don't need to pay me. Seeing her recover will be payment enough." "That's not right. Your time and expertise have value." "Then buy me dinner tomorrow evening if she makes it through the night. There's a decent restaurant at the hotel." The words were out before Sarah could stop them, and she felt her cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the Arizona temperature. She just propositioned a strange man for dinner, something she'd never done in her 22 years of life. But there was something about Vincent Parker that made her want to take risks she'd normally avoid. A slow smile spread across Vincent's face, transforming his weathered features into something genuinely handsome. "I'd be honored, though I think Juniper will make it through just fine with you watching over her." They worked together through the afternoon, taking turns walking Juniper slowly around the stable, monitoring her vital signs, and making sure she drank the electrolyte mixture in small, steady amounts. Vincent proved to be an attentive student, learning quickly as Sarah explained what she was checking for and why each symptom mattered. He asked intelligent questions and actually listened to her answers instead of dismissing her knowledge the way most men did. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting Chloride in shades of orange and gold, Vincent finally prepared to head back to his camp. "I'll be back before dawn," he said. "Will you really stay with her all night? I'll sleep in the stable." "I've done it before when animals needed monitoring." Sarah adjusted the blanket she'd draped over Juniper's back. "She's past the worst danger, but I want to make sure there are no complications." Vincent hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. "That's above and beyond what anyone would expect. I don't do this for what people expect. I do it because these animals deserve someone who will fight for them." Sarah looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the narrow stable aisle. "Juniper matters to you, which means she matters to me." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Vincent reached out slowly, giving Sarah plenty of time to step back, and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear that had come loose from her braid. His fingers were rough from work but gentle, and the brief touch sent warmth spreading through Sarah's chest. "You're remarkable, Sarah Jane Morrison," Vincent said softly. "I've never met anyone quite like you. You barely know me. I know you saw what was wrong with my horse when everyone else was ready to put her down. I know you acted without hesitation and without concern for what people would think. I know you understand animals in a way that can't be taught." He paused, his hand dropping back to his side. "I know enough to want to learn more." Sarah's heart was beating faster than Juniper's had been at her worst. "Then I suppose it's good you're staying in town for a few days." Vincent's smile returned, warm and genuine. "I suppose it is. I'll see you at dawn, Sarah." She watched him leave, his tall frame silhouetted against the golden evening light, and wondered what she'd just started. Men like Vincent Parker didn't stay in small towns like Chloride. They moved with the cattle and the seasons, never putting down roots, never building anything permanent. Getting attached to him would be foolish. But as Sarah settled into the pile of clean hay she'd arranged in the corner of Juniper's stall, listening to the mare's steadily improving breathing, she couldn't help replaying every moment of the afternoon. The way Vincent had trusted her judgment without question. The way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth listening to, worth knowing. The gentle touch of his hand against her hair. Juniper shifted in her sleep, and Sarah moved to check her pulse automatically, still strong and steady. The mare would be fine. She was certain of it now. The question was whether Sarah would be fine after Vincent Parker inevitably rode out of her life. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that one dinner and a few days of acquaintance wouldn't be enough to leave a lasting impression. But deep down, in the part of her that understood things without being told, Sarah knew she was lying to herself. Something had shifted this afternoon when Vincent had looked into her eyes and asked what Juniper needed. Something that felt like the beginning of a story she'd been waiting her whole life to start. The night passed slowly, marked by hourly checks on Juniper and the distant sounds of Chloride settling into sleep. Sarah dozed between examinations, her back against the stable wall, and dreamed of oak-colored eyes and gentle hands. Dawn arrived with Vincent Parker, who appeared in the stable entrance just as the first pink light touched the eastern sky. He carried a basket that smelled of fresh bread and coffee, and his face showed the marks of a man who hadn't slept much either. "How is she?" he asked, setting the basket down and moving immediately to Juniper's stall. "See for yourself." Sarah stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in her back from the uncomfortable sleeping position. She's been drinking on her own for the last 3 hours, and her vital signs are almost completely normal. Vincent entered the stall and ran his hands over Juniper with practiced efficiency, checking everything Sarah had taught him the day before. The mare nickered softly and pushed her nose against his chest, clearly happy to see her owner. When Vincent looked back at Sarah, his expression was a mixture of relief and something deeper. "You saved her life." "We saved her life," Sarah corrected. "You're the one who listened instead of letting the crowd convince you to put her down, only because you were so certain. You stood there in the street, covered in dust, telling a crowd of doubting men that you knew better than the doctor. I've never seen anything like it." Vincent left the stall and came to stand directly in front of Sarah. Most women would have stepped aside and let the men handle it. "Most men would have killed a horse that could have been saved," Sarah replied. "I stopped caring what people think of me a long time ago. Animals don't judge me for being unconventional. They just care whether I can help them." Vincent picked up the basket he'd brought and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "I brought breakfast. Figured you'd be hungry after staying up all night." They sat together on hay bales in the stable aisle, sharing fresh bread, cheese, and strong coffee while Juniper dozed peacefully in her stall. The early morning light filtered through the gaps in the wooden walls, painting everything in soft gold, and Sarah felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Just sitting here with Vincent, eating simple food and watching a horse recover, felt more right than anything had since her father died. "Tell me about your family," Vincent said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your father was a farrier." "Best in 3 counties," Sarah said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "He worked with horses his entire life. My mother died when I was young, so it was just the 2 of us. He never tried to make me into something I wasn't. When I showed interest in his work, he taught me everything without hesitation. That's rare. Most fathers would insist their daughters learn domestic arts instead. He did that too. I can cook and clean and sew as well as any woman in Chloride, but he understood that I needed more than that. He used to say I had a gift, that I could sense things about animals that other people missed." Sarah paused, looking down at her coffee. "He died 2 years ago, kicked by a spooked horse. By the time I found him, it was too late." Vincent's hand found hers, warm and solid. "I'm sorry. I miss him every day, but I try to honor his memory by continuing his work." She looked up at Vincent, finding sympathy rather than pity in his eyes. "The town tolerates me because the livery needs someone to manage it, and I'm willing to work for less than they'd pay a man. But they don't respect what I do. They think my father was eccentric for teaching me, and that I'm strange for wanting to work with animals instead of finding a husband." "Their loss," Vincent said firmly. "Any man with sense would be honored to have a woman as skilled and dedicated as you. And yet I'm 22 and unmarried with no prospects. The men in Chloride want wives who will keep house and bear children and never question their husband's decisions. They don't want a woman who knows more about horses than they do and isn't afraid to say so." Vincent squeezed her hand gently. "Then the men in Chloride are fools. You deserve someone who values your knowledge and respects your independence." Sarah met his eyes, seeing sincerity there that made her chest tighten. "Someone like you. I'm just a cowboy who pushes cattle across the territory." I live rough most of the year, sleeping under the stars or in line camps. It's not an easy life. But you love it. I do, Vincent admitted. The freedom of it, the challenge. Every day is different. Every season brings new problems to solve. And the land out here, the vastness of it, makes you feel like anything is possible. I understand that feeling, Sarah said softly. That's how I feel when I'm working with horses. Like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I was born to do. They finished breakfast as the town began to wake around them, the sounds of opening shops and morning greetings filtering into the stable. Vincent helped Sarah clean up and check on Juniper one more time before he needed to head back to his camp. "I'll be back this evening," he promised. "And I haven't forgotten about dinner. 7 o'clock at the hotel restaurant. I'll be there," Sarah said, trying to ignore the flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. She watched him leave again, then forced herself to focus on the day's work. The livery had other horses that needed care, stalls that needed mucking, and tack that needed mending. She threw herself into the familiar tasks, trying not to count the hours until evening. The day passed in a blur of routine chores interrupted by frequent checks on Juniper, who continued to improve steadily. By mid-afternoon, the mare was eating hay and moving around her stall with nearly normal energy. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction watching the recovery, knowing that her quick diagnosis and treatment had made the difference between life and death. She was brushing down a customer's horse when Doc Carlyle finally appeared, his medical bag in hand and an irritated expression on his weathered face. "Heard you were treating livestock again, Sarah," he said without preamble. "The Henderson boy said you diagnosed poisoning in some cowboy's horse yesterday." "I did," Sarah confirmed, not pausing in her brushwork. "Heavy metal contamination from Henderson Creek. The mare is recovering well." "You had no business making that diagnosis. I'm the medical professional in this town." Sarah set down the brush and turned to face him, keeping her voice level despite her annoyance. "You're a physician, Doc. You treat people. The nearest veterinarian is 3 days away, and that mare would have been dead long before anyone could have fetched him. I did what needed to be done. You're playing at being something you're not. Your father may have taught you about horses, but that doesn't make you a trained veterinarian." Doc Carlyle's tone was condescending, the voice of a man accustomed to being the final authority on medical matters. "You could have been wrong. That animal could have died because of your interference. But she didn't die. She's recovering in that stall right there if you'd like to examine her yourself and verify my diagnosis." Doc Carlyle did exactly that, spending 10 minutes examining Juniper while Sarah waited with crossed arms. When he emerged from the stall, his expression was grudgingly impressed, despite his obvious desire to find fault. "Your diagnosis was correct," he admitted. "The symptoms are consistent with heavy metal poisoning, and your treatment appears to have been appropriate. But that doesn't change the fact that you're practicing medicine without proper training or certification. I'm helping animals that would otherwise suffer or die because no one else in this town has the knowledge or the inclination to treat them properly. If that's a crime, then I suppose I'm guilty." Sarah kept her voice steady, but she could feel anger building in her chest. "I've never charged more than what it costs for supplies and feed. I'm not competing with you for business, Doc. I'm filling a need that nobody else wants to fill. You're a woman operating outside the bounds of propriety and professional standards. What happens when you make a mistake? When an animal dies because you misdiagnosed the problem? Then I'll live with that burden, just like every doctor or veterinarian who has ever lost a patient. But so far, Doc, my instincts have been right every single time. Can you say the same? The older man's face reddened, but before he could respond, Vincent's voice came from the stable entrance. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah turned to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and assessing. He looked like he'd cleaned up since morning, his shirt fresh and his hair damp from washing, and Sarah's heart did an unexpected skip at the sight of him. "No problem," Doc Carlyle said stiffly. "I was simply examining the patient Miss Morrison treated and verifying her diagnosis. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual patients to attend to." He left without waiting for a response, his dignity clearly wounded but his professional assessment supporting Sarah's treatment. Vincent watched him go, then turned to Sarah with a raised eyebrow. "Actual patients? What does that make Juniper?" "According to Doc Carlyle, horses don't count as real patients because I'm not a real veterinarian." Sarah shrugged, trying to hide how much the confrontation had shaken her. "It's an old argument. He thinks I'm overstepping by treating animals without formal training." "But you saved Juniper's life when no one else could have. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything to the animals I've helped. But to men like Doc Carlyle, it just proves that I'm not conforming to proper feminine behavior." Sarah moved back to the horse she'd been grooming, needing something to do with her hands. "I've learned to live with the disapproval. It's the price I pay for doing work I love." Vincent was quiet for a moment, and when Sarah glanced at him, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "I'm trying to figure out how the men in this town could be blind enough to see your skills as a problem instead of the gift they are." He moved closer, taking the brush from her hand and setting it aside. "You're brilliant at what you do, Sarah. Anyone with eyes can see that. You only say that because I saved your horse." "I say it because it's true. I've been around horses and cattle my entire life. I've worked with cowboys and ranchers and professional veterinarians. You have instincts that can't be taught, and you're not afraid to trust them even when everyone else doubts you. That's rare. That's valuable." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly, emotion swelling in her throat. "Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." Vincent's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. "I think I'm beginning to understand just how alone you've been, fighting for recognition in a town that refuses to see your worth." Sarah leaned into his touch without thinking, starved for the simple comfort of being understood. "It's been hard since my father died. He was the only one who really believed in me." "You're not alone anymore," Vincent said softly. "Not while I'm here." The words sent warmth spreading through Sarah's chest, dangerous and thrilling all at once. She knew she shouldn't read too much into them, that Vincent would leave Chloride in a few days, and she'd probably never see him again. But standing here in the golden afternoon light, his hand gentle against her face and his eyes full of something that looked like the beginning of love, Sarah let herself imagine what it might be like if he stayed. "We should probably get ready for dinner," she said reluctantly, stepping back before she could do something foolish like kiss him. "I need to close up the stable and change into something presentable." "You look beautiful exactly as you are," Vincent said, and the sincerity in his voice made Sarah's breath catch. "I'm covered in dust and horse hair. And you've never looked more perfect." Sarah laughed despite herself, the sound breaking the intensity of the moment. "You're either a romantic or you need your eyes checked, but I'm still going to change. Give me an hour. I'll count every minute." Sarah fled to her small room above the livery, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She washed quickly with water from the basin, scrubbing away the day's work and trying to calm her racing thoughts. What was she doing, falling for a cowboy who would leave as soon as his cattle were rested? She'd spent years protecting herself from exactly this kind of heartbreak, focusing on her work and convincing herself she didn't need romance in her life. But as she pulled on her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, Sarah couldn't deny the excitement bubbling up inside her. For the first time in years, someone saw her as more than just the strange Morrison girl who preferred horses to people. Vincent looked at her like she was remarkable, like her knowledge and skills made her more attractive rather than less. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up simply, leaving a few tendrils loose to soften the severe style. The mirror showed a woman transformed from the dusty, stable hand of this morning into someone almost elegant, and Sarah felt a flutter of nerves as she imagined Vincent's reaction. He was waiting outside the livery when she emerged, leaning against the hitching post in clean clothes with his hat in his hands. When he saw her, his expression shifted into something that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "I was wrong," he said, straightening and offering his arm. "You can look even more perfect." Sarah took his arm, allowing him to guide her down the dusty main street toward the hotel. Chloride came alive in the evenings, with lights glowing in windows and the sounds of conversation and laughter drifting from the saloons. People turned to watch as they passed, and Sarah could feel the weight of curious stares following them. "Let them look," Vincent said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Let them see that someone appreciates you the way you deserve to be appreciated." The hotel restaurant was simple but clean, with checked tablecloths and oil lamps casting warm light over the handful of occupied tables. The proprietor, Mrs. Chen, showed them to a corner table with a genuine smile that made Sarah relax slightly. At least not everyone in town disapproved of her. They ordered the evening special, which turned out to be beef stew with fresh bread and roasted vegetables, and Sarah found herself relaxing as conversation flowed easily between them. Vincent told her about growing up on a small ranch in New Mexico, learning the cattle business from his father before striking out on his own 5 years ago. "I wanted to see the territory, learn different ways of doing things," he explained. "So I hired on with various outfits, moved around, took jobs that would teach me new skills, eventually saved enough to buy my own small herd and start contracting drives. You ever get tired of moving around? Don't you want to settle somewhere, build something permanent?" Vincent considered the question seriously, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "I thought the moving was what I wanted, the freedom, the constant change. But lately I've been wondering if maybe I was just running from something instead of running toward it." "Running from what?" "Responsibility, maybe. Commitment. The idea that settling down meant giving up adventure." He set down his fork and leaned forward, his eyes intense on hers. "But meeting you has made me think that maybe the real adventure is building something with someone who shares your values and your dreams." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Vincent, we've only known each other a day." "I know, and maybe I'm crazy for feeling this way so fast. But I learned a long time ago that you can spend years with someone and never really know them, or you can spend a few hours with the right person and understand them completely." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I see you, Sarah. I see who you are and what you want, and everything I see makes me want to know more." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers stained with work despite her scrubbing. "What I want is impossible. I want to do real veterinary work, be recognized as a professional, help animals across the territory. But that's not possible for a woman, especially not an unmarried woman without family connections or formal training. What if it was possible? What if you had someone who supported your dreams instead of trying to limit them? Then I suppose I'd be living in a fairy tale instead of Chloride, Arizona." Sarah tried to keep her tone light, but she couldn't quite hide the longing underneath. Vincent squeezed her hand gently. Maybe you're just in the wrong place. The territory is changing, Sarah. Towns are growing up all over, and they need skilled people to help them thrive. There are places that would welcome someone with your abilities instead of fighting against them. And what would I do? Pack up and wander around hoping to stumble across this magical town that values female veterinarians. You could come with me. The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. Sarah stared at Vincent, trying to determine if he was serious or if this was some kind of elaborate jest. Come with you, she repeated slowly. You mean follow your cattle drive? I mean travel with me, see the territory, meet ranchers and settlers who need someone with your skills. Build a reputation based on results instead of fighting against prejudice in a town that will never see past your gender. Vincent's eyes were bright with enthusiasm, his whole body leaning forward as the idea took shape. I could introduce you to people I know, people who care more about results than propriety. You could prove yourself on your own terms. That's insane. A woman traveling alone with a man she barely knows, working with livestock and living rough. The scandal would follow me forever. Only if you plan to come back to Chloride. But why would you come back to a place that refuses to value you? Sarah pulled her hand back, needing space to think. Everything Vincent was suggesting went against every rule of propriety she'd been taught. Unmarried women didn't travel with men, didn't chase dreams across the territory, didn't abandon stability for the uncertain promise of adventure. And yet, the possibility called to something deep in her soul, the same instinct that told her when a horse was sick or a treatment would work. I can't just leave, she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. Why not? What's keeping you here besides fear? The livery depends on me. The animals in this town need someone to care for them. The livery will hire someone else. They managed before you and they'll manage after. And the animals of Chloride will have to make do while you go help animals across the entire territory instead of just in one small town. Vincent's voice gentled. I'm not trying to pressure you, Sarah. I know this is sudden and probably sounds completely mad. But I also know that in the day I've known you, I've seen more passion and dedication and pure talent than I've encountered in years of traveling. And I can't stand the thought of leaving you here to be diminished by people who don't understand what they have. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Vincent must be able to hear it. Everything logical told her to refuse, to thank him for a lovely evening and send him on his way tomorrow, to stay in Chloride where life was difficult but familiar. But the part of her that had always trusted her instincts, the part her father had nurtured and encouraged, was screaming at her to take the risk. Let me think about it, she finally said. This is too big a decision to make over dinner. Vincent nodded, though she could see disappointment flicker across his face. Of course. I wouldn't expect anything else. My crew and I will be here for at least 3 more days while the cattle rest. That gives you time to consider what you want. They finished dinner with the conversation carefully steered toward safer topics, but the weight of Vincent's proposal hung over everything. When he walked Sarah back to the livery, the night air was cool and the stars blazed overhead in vast profusion, unfettered by city lights. Thank you for dinner, Sarah said as they reached the stable entrance, and for everything today, for trusting me with Juniper, for understanding what I do and why it matters. Thank you for saving her, Vincent replied. And for making me realize that I've been missing something important in my life. What's that? Someone to share it with. Someone who sees the world the way I do, who understands that the work we do matters even if other people don't appreciate it. He reached out and tucked another strand of hair behind her ear, just as he had that afternoon. Think about what I said, Sarah. Really think about it. Imagine what your life could be if you stopped fighting against the limitations Chloride puts on you and started building something new where those limitations don't exist. Sarah couldn't find words to respond, so she simply nodded. Vincent held her gaze for a long moment, then leaned in slowly and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Sarah Jane Morrison. Sweet dreams." He turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway with her hand pressed to where his lips had touched, and her mind racing with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider before. She checked on Juniper one last time before heading up to her room. The mare was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and her color good. A complete recovery, just as Sarah had predicted. She stood at the stall door for a long time, watching the horse rest and trying to sort through the chaos of emotions churning in her chest. Vincent Parker had walked into her life less than 24 hours ago, and already he was offering to turn everything upside down. It was reckless and impractical and completely insane to even consider his proposal. She should tell him no tomorrow, wish him well, and return to her predictable if unsatisfying life in Chloride. But as Sarah finally climbed the stairs to her small room and lay down in her narrow bed, she couldn't stop imagining what it would feel like to say yes. To pack her few belongings and head out into the vast territory with a man who saw her as an equal. To use her skills without constantly fighting for basic respect. To wake up each morning not knowing exactly what the day would bring but trusting that it would be an adventure worth having. She fell asleep with Vincent's words echoing in her mind and woke before dawn with a decision crystallizing in her heart. The morning routine of feeding and watering the livery horses gave Sarah time to think through the practical aspects of what she was considering. She owned very little beyond her clothes and her father's veterinary tools. The livery building belonged to a consortium of town businessmen who paid her a small salary to manage it. She had no family ties keeping her in Chloride, no close friends who would mourn her departure. The realization was both freeing and sad, confirmation that Vincent was right about her having nothing truly binding her here. She was mucking out stalls when he arrived mid-morning, looking like he'd been awake for hours despite the early hour. His eyes went immediately to her face, searching for some sign of her decision. "Juniper looks completely recovered," Sarah said instead of greeting him. "You could move her to your camp today if you wanted. She's strong enough for light work." "That's wonderful news." Vincent's relief was genuine, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He wanted to ask about his proposal but was holding back, giving her space. Sarah set down her pitchfork and brushed hay from her skirt, gathering her courage. "I have some questions about your offer." Vincent's attention sharpened immediately. "Ask me anything. Where exactly would we be going? What would the arrangement be? And please be honest about the difficulties, because I'm not naive enough to think it would all be adventure and excitement." "Fair enough." Vincent leaned against the stall door, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. "My current contract is to deliver 200 head to Tucson, which is about 2 weeks' travel from here. After that, I was planning to head north into New Mexico territory, maybe pick up another herd to move. I know ranchers throughout the region who struggle to find good veterinary care for their stock. With your skills, we could build a circuit, traveling between ranches and offering treatment for sick or injured animals." "We." You keep saying we. Because I'm proposing a partnership. You provide the veterinary expertise. I provide the connections and protection and knowledge of the territory. We split any profits equally. And the sleeping arrangements. Sarah forced herself to ask the question directly. "I'm not naive about what people will assume if I'm traveling with you." Vincent met her eyes steadily. Separate bedrolls, separate spaces, complete propriety. I won't lie and say people won't talk because they will. But I'm not proposing anything improper, Sarah. I'm proposing a business partnership with someone I respect and admire. Just business. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, an emotion quickly controlled. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have feelings beyond business. You're remarkable and beautiful, and you've captured my attention in a way no one ever has before. But I won't push for anything you're not ready to give. If all you ever want is partnership and friendship, I'll accept that. Sarah studied him carefully, using the same instincts that helped her read animals to assess his sincerity. Everything in his posture and expression told her he was being truthful, that he genuinely respected her enough to honor whatever boundaries she set. I have conditions, she said slowly. If I agree to this. Hope blazed across Vincent's face. Name them. First, I need to give proper notice to the livery owners and make sure they can hire someone to replace me. I won't leave them in a lurch. Second, I want a clear agreement about the partnership, including how we'll handle disputes and what happens if one of us wants to end the arrangement. Third, if at any point I want to stop or change the terms, you have to respect that immediately. Agreed to all three. Vincent straightened, energy practically vibrating through him. Does this mean you're saying yes? Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff preparing to jump. It means I'm saying yes. Against all logic and reason, I'm saying yes. Vincent's whoop of joy startled the horses, and before Sarah could react, he'd swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. When he set her down, both of them were breathless and grinning like children. You won't regret this, he promised. I swear to you, Sarah, I'll do everything in my power to make sure you have opportunities to show what you can really do. I'm already regretting it a little bit, Sarah admitted. This is the most impulsive thing I've ever done, but it also feels right in a way I can't explain. That's your instincts telling you this is the path you're meant to follow. Trust them the way you trust them with horses. Sarah spent the rest of the day making arrangements, her mind spinning with everything that needed to be done. She met with the livery owners and gave them 2 days' notice, enduring their disapproval and their predictions of ruin with as much grace as she could manage. She packed her belongings, which fit easily into 2 canvas bags and a trunk containing her father's tools. She said quiet goodbyes to the regular horses she'd cared for, feeling a pang of sadness mixed with the excitement. Vincent returned that evening with news that he'd spoken to his crew about the change in plans. They're curious about you, he said. Most of them have heard stories about the woman who diagnosed Juniper's poisoning when everyone else wanted to put her down. They're looking forward to meeting you. How many people in your crew? 5, including me. There's Miguel, who's been my segundo for 3 years. He's the best cattleman I've ever worked with. Then there's Charlie and Ben, brothers from Texas who know more about horses than most people forget. And James, who's young but learning fast. They're all good men, Sarah. I wouldn't travel with anyone I didn't trust. Sarah nodded, trying to imagine herself integrated into this group of men who lived rough and worked hard. It was so far from anything she'd ever experienced that it almost didn't seem real. The next 2 days passed in a blur of final preparations and nervous energy. Vincent spent most of his time at the livery, helping Sarah organize and answering her increasingly detailed questions about life on the trail. He was patient with her concerns, honest about the difficulties, and encouraging about her abilities to adapt. On her last evening in Chloride, Sarah stood in the livery for the final time, running her hands over the worn wood of the stalls and remembering all the animals she'd treated here. It felt like closing a chapter of her life, one that had been both fulfilling and limiting in equal measure. Ready. Vincent asked softly from behind her. Sarah turned to face him, seeing understanding in his eyes. As ready as I'll ever be. Let's go before I lose my courage. They left Chloride in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah riding one of Vincent's spare horses and leading a pack horse with her belongings. The town was still sleeping, unaware that the strange Morrison girl was leaving for good. Sarah didn't look back as they rode south, focusing instead on the vast open territory ahead, and the man riding beside her who had somehow convinced her to take the biggest risk of her life. The cattle camp was exactly as Sarah had imagined, a loose collection of bedrolls and supply wagons arranged in a rough circle with 200 head of cattle grazing peacefully nearby. 4 men looked up as Vincent and Sarah rode in, their faces showing varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Everyone, this is Sarah Jane Morrison," Vincent said, dismounting and helping Sarah down with an easy courtesy that felt natural. "She's the veterinarian I told you about. Sarah, this is my crew." Miguel stepped forward first, a man in his 40s with silver threading his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Morrison, Vincent says you saved Juniper's life. We're grateful for that. She's a good horse. Thank you, and please call me Sarah." She met his gaze directly, knowing this first impression mattered. "I'm looking forward to learning from all of you. I know animals, but I have a lot to learn about life on the trail." Something in Miguel's expression softened slightly. "Fair enough. Any friend of Vincent's is welcome here. And anyone who can diagnose copper poisoning that fast knows their business." The others introduced themselves, and while Sarah could sense their reservation about having a woman in camp, she also sensed that they were willing to give her a chance. They'd see how she handled herself over the coming days and make their judgments based on actions rather than assumptions. Vincent had set up a separate sleeping area for Sarah, screened off from the main camp by a canvas tarp strung between 2 wagons. It was basic but private, and Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. "We'll move out at first light," Vincent explained as Sarah arranged her bedroll. "It's about a 2-week drive to Tucson, longer if we hit any problems. The pace is slow because we're letting the cattle graze as we go, keeping them in good condition for sale. You'll have plenty of time to observe and learn the rhythm of the drive." "What do you need me to do? I want to earn my place." Vincent smiled at her determination. "For now, just settle in and get comfortable. Tomorrow I'll have you check over all the horses, make sure none of them are developing problems. We can't afford to have a horse go lame or sick in the middle of the desert." That night, lying in her bedroll under more stars than she'd ever seen in Chloride, Sarah listened to the sounds of the camp settling down and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The ground was hard beneath her. The night air carried strange sounds, and she was surrounded by men she barely knew in a landscape that seemed to go on forever in all directions. But when she closed her eyes, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in the 2 years since her father died. She felt like she was moving towards something instead of just surviving, like her life was expanding instead of contracting, like maybe, just maybe, she'd made exactly the right choice. The days on the trail developed their own rhythm, one that Sarah adapted to with surprising ease. She woke before dawn with the rest of the crew, helped break camp, and then spent the morning riding alongside the herd as it moved slowly south. Vincent kept her close at first, teaching her the ins and outs of managing cattle on the move, explaining the subtle signs that indicated problems before they became serious. Sarah discovered that her instincts with horses translated well to cattle. She could spot a sick animal in the herd before anyone else noticed, could sense when the livestock was getting stressed or tired, could predict which way a group would move based on wind direction and available grazing. The crew's skepticism gradually transformed into respect as they saw her skills in action. On the fourth day out, one of the horses pulling the supply wagon started favoring its left foreleg. Sarah noticed immediately and called a halt to examine the animal. The crew gathered around as she ran her hands down the leg, feeling for heat or swelling, checking the hoof carefully. "Stone bruise," she announced. "Not serious yet, but it will be if we keep working her. She needs to be rested for a few days." "We can't afford to rest a wagon horse in the middle of the drive," Charlie protested. "We need that wagon moving. Then we swap her with one of the remuda horses and let her travel light for a few days," Sarah said calmly. "Better to make a small adjustment now than have her go completely lame and lose the use of her for weeks." Miguel looked at Vincent, who nodded his agreement. "Sarah's right. Make the swap, Charlie. We'll rotate the horses so no one animal gets overworked." It was a small moment, but Sarah felt the shift in how the crew viewed her. She wasn't just Vincent's guest anymore. She was a valuable member of the team whose expertise they could rely on. Vincent seemed to sense the change too, and that evening as they sat by the fire after dinner, he moved to sit beside her with a smile that warmed her more than the flames. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "The men are impressed, even if they won't say so directly." "I'm just doing what I know how to do. Animals are animals, whether they're in a stable or on the open range. It's more than that. You're adapting to trail life like you were born to it. I knew you would, but it's still remarkable to watch." Vincent's hand found hers in the darkness between them, his fingers intertwining with hers naturally. "I'm glad you said yes, Sarah. Every day I'm more certain that we make a good team." Sarah's heart skipped at the touch, at the quiet intimacy of sitting together under the vast desert stars. Over the past few days, something had been growing between them, a connection deeper than partnership or friendship. She caught herself watching for Vincent throughout the day, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence on horseback, the patient way he explained things to young James, the quiet authority with which he managed his crew. "I'm glad, too," she admitted. "I was terrified that first night. Everything was so different from what I was used to. But now I can't imagine going back to Chloride, to that small stable and those small mines." "You were never meant for small anything," Vincent said. "You're meant for this, for the open territory and the freedom to use your gifts without artificial limitations." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. Around them, the crew prepared for sleep, their voices gradually quieting. Sarah felt a contentment settling into her bones, a rightness about this life that she'd never experienced before. "Vincent," she said softly, "what happens after Tucson? Have you thought about what comes next? I have some ideas." "There's a rancher I know up in New Mexico. Runs about 5,000 head across a huge spread. He's always complaining about losing animals to preventable illness because there's no veterinary care within 100 miles. I thought we could head there, offer your services. If it works out, word will spread and we could build a real business." "A traveling veterinary practice," Sarah mused. "Has anyone ever done something like that before? Not that I know of. But that doesn't mean it can't work. The territory needs what you can offer, Sarah. We just have to prove it's possible." The confidence in his voice made Sarah believe it could actually happen. With Vincent's connections and her skills, maybe they really could create something new, something that would give her the professional respect she'd always craved while also allowing her the freedom she'd never known she needed. The conversation drifted to other topics, easier things, but Vincent didn't release her hand, and Sarah didn't pull away. When they finally said goodnight and retreated to their separate sleeping areas, Sarah carried the warmth of his touch with her into dreams that were filled with open horizons and endless possibilities. The days flowed into each other, marked by miles traveled and small challenges overcome. Sarah treated minor injuries and illnesses among both the livestock and the crew, earning grateful thanks and growing respect. She learned to rope cattle from Miguel, to read the weather from the older cowboys, to cook over an open fire when it was her turn to help with meals. The life was harder than anything she'd experienced in Chloride, but it was also more satisfying. And through it all, Vincent was there, teaching her, encouraging her, making her laugh with stories of past drives and close calls. They fell into patterns without discussing them, sitting together at meals, riding side by side during the day, talking long into the evening by the fire. The crew began giving them knowing looks, but no one commented directly on the obvious connection growing between them. On the 10th day, they encountered a small ranch struggling with an outbreak of disease among their cattle. The rancher, a weathered man named Thomas Wright, was beside himself with worry. "Lost 15 head already," he told Vincent when they stopped to water the herd at his creek. Veterinarian from Tucson said he'd come out, but that was 2 weeks ago and he never showed. "I'm watching my life's work die and I can't do a thing to stop it." Sarah exchanged a glance with Vincent, who nodded permission. "I'm a veterinarian," she said to Wright. "If you'll let me examine your sick cattle, maybe I can help." Wright looked skeptical, his eyes traveling over Sarah's dusty trail clothes and unconventional presence in a cattle camp. "You're a woman." "I'm a veterinarian," Sarah repeated firmly. "Gender doesn't change the fact that I know how to diagnose and treat livestock diseases. Your cattle are dying. What do you have to lose by letting me look?" "She knows her business," Vincent added. "She saved my best cutting horse from copper poisoning when everyone else wanted to put her down. I trust her completely." Something in Vincent's tone, the absolute certainty in his voice, convinced Wright to agree. He led Sarah to the sick cattle, and she spent an hour examining them carefully, noting symptoms and asking detailed questions about timeline and progression. By the time she finished, she had a clear diagnosis. "Blackleg," she announced. "It's a bacterial infection that affects the muscle tissue, fatal if untreated but preventable with vaccination. The animals you've already lost are gone, but I can treat the ones showing early symptoms and vaccinate the rest of your herd to prevent further spread." "Do you have the vaccine?" Wright asked, hope and skepticism warring in his expression. "I can make it. I'll need some supplies in about 6 hours, but yes, I can save your herd." Sarah met his eyes directly. "But I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" Wright looked at her for a long moment, then at Vincent, then back at Sarah. Finally, he nodded. "If Vincent Parker vouches for you, that's good enough for me. Tell me what you need." Sarah spent the rest of the day working with single-minded focus, preparing vaccine batches and treating the sick animals while instructing Wright and his small crew on how to prevent future outbreaks. Vincent watched her work with obvious pride, helping where he could and staying out of her way when she needed space. By evening, Sarah had treated 30 cattle and vaccinated the entire healthy portion of Wright's herd. She was exhausted, her clothes filthy and her hands cramping from the repetitive work, but she felt a deep satisfaction as she surveyed the results. The sick ones should start showing improvement within 48 hours, she told Wright. "If they don't, or if you see any worsening symptoms, the nearest telegraph office can reach me in Tucson. I'll leave instructions on how to send word." Wright was staring at his cattle with an expression close to awe. "You just saved my ranch, Miss Morrison. I don't know how to thank you." "Pay her," Vincent said simply. "Her expertise has value, and she deserves to be compensated for it." The amount Wright paid was more money than Sarah had earned in 3 months working the Chloride livery. She stared at the bills in her hand, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She'd done professional veterinary work, been paid a professional wage, and earned the respect of a rancher who'd initially doubted her because of her gender. "This is really happening," she said to Vincent as they rode back to rejoin the crew. "We're actually building something." Vincent's grin was infectious. "We're just getting started. Wait until word spreads about what you did for Wright's ranch. Every rancher in the territory will be clamoring for your services." That night, the crew celebrated with an extra ration of whiskey and congratulations for Sarah's success. She sat by the fire accepting their praise, feeling more validated and valued than she ever had in Chloride. And when Vincent sat beside her and slipped his arm around her shoulders in full view of everyone, Sarah leaned into him without hesitation. "Thank you," she said softly, for his ears alone. "For believing in me, for giving me this chance." "Thank you for taking it," Vincent replied, "and for showing me what was missing from my life." Sarah looked up at him, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. The connection between them had grown from attraction to something deeper, something that felt like it could become love if they let it. And sitting here under the desert stars with Vincent's arm warm around her and her future opening up in ways she'd never imagined, Sarah decided she was ready to let it. She tilted her face up, and Vincent understood the invitation immediately. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving her time to change her mind. But Sarah had never been more certain of anything. She kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding in reserve and felt him respond with matching passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the crew was diplomatically looking anywhere but at them. Miguel was grinning into his coffee cup, and young James looked like he was trying not to laugh. "Guess the secret is out," Vincent said, not sounding remotely sorry. "There wasn't much of a secret," Miguel commented dryly. "You two have been making eyes at each other since Chloride. About time you did something about it." Sarah felt her cheeks heat, but she couldn't stop smiling. Vincent's hand found hers again, and this time when he held it, the gesture felt like a promise rather than just comfort. The remaining days to Tucson passed in a blur of new intimacy and growing confidence. Vincent and Sarah were careful to maintain propriety in camp, but they stole moments alone when they could, talking about their hopes and dreams, sharing kisses that made Sarah's pulse race, building the foundation of something real and lasting. They reached Tucson on a blazing afternoon, the city sprawling across the desert landscape, with more buildings and people than Sarah had ever seen in one place. Vincent delivered his cattle to the buyer, negotiated payment, and met with contacts about future work, while Sarah explored the city with wide eyes. That evening, Vincent took her to a proper restaurant with white tablecloths and actual menus, a celebration of the successful drive and the new venture they were launching together. "I've been thinking," Vincent said over dinner, his expression serious, "about what comes next and how we structure this partnership." Sarah's stomach clenched nervously. "You're having second thoughts." "The opposite. I'm having very definite first thoughts." Vincent reached across the table and took both her hands. "I told you in Chloride that I was proposing a business partnership, that I'd respect whatever boundaries you set. And I meant that, Sarah. But I need you to know that somewhere along the trail, my feelings evolved beyond business into something much more personal." "Vincent, let me finish." "I'm in love with you, Sarah. Completely and irrevocably in love with you. I love your intelligence and your compassion and your courage. I love the way you light up when you're working with animals. I love your stubborn refusal to let anyone diminish your worth. I love everything about you, and I need you to know that before we go any further." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, emotion swelling in her throat. "I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible and protect my heart. But somewhere between Chloride and Tucson, you became the most important person in my life." Vincent's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "Then I have something to ask you, and I need you to consider it carefully before answering." He stood from the table, and before Sarah quite understood what was happening, Vincent was kneeling beside her chair with a small box in his hand. "Sarah Jane Morrison, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I know this is fast, and I know we have 1,000 practical details to work out. But I'm certain that I want to spend my life with you, building our veterinary practice and exploring this territory, and waking up every morning knowing I get to see your face. Will you marry me?" Sarah's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. Everything was happening so quickly, faster than propriety or logic would recommend. But her instincts, the same instincts that had guided her through every important decision, were telling her that this was right. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Vincent slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms for a kiss that made the other restaurant patrons applaud. Sarah laughed against his mouth, deliriously happy and slightly shocked at how much her life had transformed in just 2 weeks. They were married 3 days later by a justice of the peace, with Miguel and the crew serving as witnesses. Sarah wore a new dress purchased in Tucson, simple but pretty, and Vincent looked almost nervous as he said his vows. The ceremony was brief and practical, but when the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah felt like she was beginning the greatest adventure of her life. Their wedding night was spent in a hotel room, the first real privacy they'd had since leaving Chloride. Vincent was gentle and patient, clearly determined to make the experience good for Sarah, despite her inexperience. And Sarah discovered that the physical intimacy matched the emotional connection they'd built, that being with Vincent felt as natural and right as everything else about their relationship. Afterward, lying in Vincent's arms with her head on his chest, Sarah traced idle patterns on his skin and thought about how dramatically her life had changed. "You think we're crazy?" she asked softly. "Getting married after knowing each other less than a month, probably," Vincent admitted. "But I'd rather be crazy with you than sensible without you. Besides, I knew on that first day in Chloride that you were different, special, exactly what I'd been searching for without knowing I was searching. I knew too. The moment you trusted my diagnosis without question, without letting my gender make you doubt my expertise, that's when I started falling for you." Vincent pressed a kiss to her hair. "Well, now you're stuck with me. Sarah Jane Parker, veterinarian and wife. I like the sound of that, both parts." They left Tucson a week later, heading north into New Mexico territory with letters of introduction from Vincent's contacts, and a growing reputation based on Sarah's success with Wright's Ranch. Word had already spread through the ranching community about the female veterinarian who'd stopped a blackleg outbreak, and they arrived at the first ranch on their circuit to find the owner eager for Sarah's services. The pattern repeated itself over the following months. They traveled from ranch to ranch, Sarah treating sick animals and teaching prevention methods while Vincent handled the business arrangements and logistics. They lived out of a wagon Vincent had purchased, a compact but well-organized mobile home that gave them both workspace and living space. The work was challenging and exhausting, but Sarah had never been happier. She was using her skills fully, being paid fairly, and earning respect based solely on her results. And at the end of each long day, she had Vincent beside her, sharing the victories and challenges, building a life together that combined everything they both loved. By the time winter arrived, they'd established a regular circuit of ranches across southern New Mexico and Arizona, with more requests for Sarah's services coming in every week. They were making good money, enough to start saving toward buying their own land someday. But more importantly, they were building a partnership that worked on every level. Vincent handled the aspects of the business that Sarah found tedious, while Sarah's veterinary expertise gave them a unique service no one else in the territory could match. They balanced each other perfectly, each one's strengths complementing the other's weaknesses, and through it all, their love continued to deepen. The initial passionate attraction had matured into something solid and enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. They learned each other's habits and moods, developed private jokes and shorthand communication, became so attuned that they often knew what the other needed without words. One evening in early spring, as they were camped near Santa Fe between ranching jobs, Sarah realized her monthly courses were late. She'd been too busy to notice at first, but as she counted back the weeks, certainty grew in her chest. "Vincent," she said carefully, "I think I might be pregnant." Vincent's reaction was immediate and joyful. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around just as he had in the Chloride livery when she'd agreed to leave with him, laughing with pure delight. "We're going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Sarah, we're going to be parents. Are you happy?" "I know this will complicate the business, make traveling harder. I'm thrilled. This is the best news I've ever gotten besides you agreeing to marry me." Vincent set her down carefully, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We'll figure out the logistics. We always do. But right now, I just want to celebrate that we're starting a family." They spent the evening making plans and dreaming about the future. Vincent insisted they needed to find a more permanent base, somewhere Sarah could rest during the later months of pregnancy and where they could raise a child safely. Sarah agreed, though she hated the thought of giving up the nomadic life they'd built. But as spring turned to summer, and Sarah's pregnancy became visible, they began looking for property with serious intent. They found it in a valley north of Santa Fe, a small ranch with good water and grazing land, close enough to their circuit of clients that they could continue the veterinary practice while having a home base. Vincent bought the property with their savings, and they spent the summer months building it up, adding a proper stable and veterinary clinic, fixing up the small house, preparing for the baby who would arrive in early autumn. Sarah continued working as long as she physically could, treating animals and teaching Vincent more advanced veterinary techniques, so he could assist her after the baby came. The local ranchers were understanding and supportive, many of them adjusting their schedules to make sure Sarah could treat their animals before she went into confinement. Their son was born on a cool September evening with a local midwife attending and Vincent holding Sarah's hand through every contraction. They named him Thomas Vincent Parker, after Sarah's father and his own, and from the moment Sarah held him, she understood a new dimension of love entirely. Vincent was a devoted father from the start, taking to the role with the same natural competence he showed with everything else. He walked Thomas through the stables, introducing him to the horses. He changed diapers and soothed nighttime fussiness, and looked at his son with such obvious adoration that Sarah sometimes felt her heart might burst. They adjusted their business model to accommodate the new addition, with Vincent taking on more of the travel while Sarah handled cases that came to their ranch clinic. It wasn't quite as adventurous as their first year together, but it worked. And watching Vincent ride out in the morning to visit ranches, then return in the evening to scoop up Thomas with tired but happy enthusiasm, Sarah realized they'd built something remarkable. They'd created a life that honored both their professional ambitions and their personal relationship. They'd proven that a woman could be a successful veterinarian in the Wild West if given the chance. They'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances and turned it into a partnership that strengthened them both. The years that followed brought more children, 2 daughters named Julia and Catherine, who inherited their mother's gift with animals and their father's easy charm. The veterinary practice grew steadily, eventually requiring them to hire assistants to keep up with demand. Their ranch became known throughout the territory as the place to bring sick animals, and Sarah's reputation spread far beyond New Mexico. Vincent expanded into ranching himself, building their herds slowly and carefully, always mindful of the lessons they'd learned on the trail. He taught their children to ride and rope, to respect the animals they worked with, to value knowledge over gender or convention. And Sarah continued doing what she loved, treating animals and teaching anyone who wanted to learn, proving year after year that expertise and dedication mattered more than following social conventions. She trained several young men as veterinarians, passing on her father's knowledge and her own hard-won experience. She wrote articles for farming journals about animal health, building a reputation that eventually reached beyond the territory. But the greatest satisfaction came from the life they'd built together. Every evening when the work was done, Vincent and Sarah would sit on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, their children playing nearby, and reflect on how far they'd come from that first meeting in Chloride. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked one evening when they were both in their 40s, their children nearly grown and their business thriving. "Taking that risk with a stranger who offered you an impossible dream." Sarah took his hand, the same way they'd held hands that first night by the campfire, and smiled. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I'd dreamed of, and things I didn't even know I wanted. A career where I'm respected, a partnership built on equality, children who will grow up knowing their mother's work has value. And most importantly, a love that's made every day an adventure worth having." "I'm the lucky one," Vincent insisted. "I was just drifting before I met you, moving from job to job without purpose. You gave me something to build toward, someone to build it with. You made me want to create something permanent instead of just passing through." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent, and stars began emerging in the darkening sky. The same stars they'd watched on that first trail drive, when everything was new and uncertain and terrifying. But now, those stars looked down on a life they'd built together through trust and love, and unwavering belief in each other's worth. Thomas came up the porch steps, now a young man of 19 studying veterinary medicine formally in St. Louis but home for the summer to help with the ranch. "Ma, there's a mare in the north pasture that's off her feed. I checked her over but I can't figure out what's wrong. Would you take a look?" Sarah stood immediately, her instincts still as sharp as they'd been that day in Chloride when she diagnosed Juniper's poisoning in seconds. "Let's go see her. Vincent, you coming?" "Wouldn't miss it," Vincent said, standing and offering his arm to his wife the same way he had on their first dinner date all those years ago. Together they walked toward the stables, 3 generations of veterinary knowledge combined, and Sarah felt profound gratitude for the cowboy who had trusted her judgment above everyone else's, who had seen her potential when others saw only limitations, who had offered her not just love, but the freedom to become everything she was meant to be. The mare's problem turned out to be a simple case of early colic, easily treated now that Sarah had taught Thomas what to look for. They worked together under lamplight, Sarah guiding while Thomas performed the treatment, Vincent holding the mare's head steady just as he'd done with Juniper so many years ago. When they finally returned to the house, Sarah stopped Vincent on the porch and pulled him into a kiss that still held all the passion and promise of their early days together. "What was that for?" Vincent asked, though he was smiling. "For trusting me with Juniper. For asking me to leave Chloride. For building this life with me. For every day and every moment of the last 20 years. Sarah rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "For being exactly the partner I needed, even before I knew I needed one." Vincent's arms came around her strong and sure, holding her close under the vast New Mexico sky. "I love you, Sarah Parker, today, tomorrow, and every day after that for as long as we both shall live. I love you too, always." They stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, surrounded by the life they'd created, and knew with absolute certainty that taking that first leap of faith had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Together, equal partners in work and love, living proof that the impossible could become possible when two people trusted each other completely. The territory had changed dramatically since that day in 1883, when a mare collapsed in Chloride and Sarah had proven she could diagnose what no one else could see. Towns had grown, railroads had spread, the Wild West was gradually becoming civilized, but some things remained constant. The land was still vast and unforgiving. Animals still needed care. And love, when built on foundation of mutual respect and shared dreams, could still transform everything. Sarah Jane Parker, veterinarian and wife and mother and pioneer, had proven that a woman could succeed in a man's world if given the chance. And Vincent Parker, cowboy and rancher and husband and father, had proven that real strength came from supporting your partner's dreams rather than limiting them. Together they'd built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of skill and dedication and love that their children would carry forward. And on warm summer evenings when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch, they'd tell stories about the mare named Juniper who had brought them together, and the cowboy who had trusted a woman's instincts above everyone else's doubt. It was a good story, Sarah thought as she grew older and her hair turned silver and her hands became gnarled with arthritis, but still steady enough to treat the animals she loved. A love story set against the backdrop of the Wild West, full of adventure and challenge and triumph. The kind of story worth living, worth remembering, worth passing down to children and grandchildren who would carry the lessons forward into their own lives. And when Sarah was very old and her working days were finally behind her, she would sit on that porch with Vincent's hand in hers and watch the sunset paint the mountains in colors that never failed to take her breath away, and know that she'd lived exactly the life she was meant to live. That the scared girl who'd knelt in the dust of a Chloride street to save a dying horse had become the woman she'd always had the potential to be. All because a cowboy named Vincent Parker had looked at her and seen not limitations but possibilities. Had trusted her expertise when everyone else doubted. Had offered her not just love but partnership, not just security but adventure, not just acceptance but the freedom to become everything she could be. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. And as the sun set on another perfect day in a life full of them, Sarah Jane Parker closed her eyes and felt nothing but gratitude for the gift she'd been given. The gift of being seen, being valued, being loved for exactly who she was. The gift of a partnership that had lasted a lifetime and would echo forward into the future through the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy. The Wild West was fading into history, But the love story of the veterinarian and the cowboy who trusted her above all others would live on, a testament to what became possible when two people met at exactly the right moment and had the courage to build something new together. It was, Sarah thought with her last bit of awareness before sleep claimed her, a very good story indeed. The best story. Her story. Their story. A love story that had started with a sick horse and a leap of faith and had become a lifetime of shared purpose and unshakable devotion. And in the morning, when Sarah woke with the sun on her face and Vincent's hand still holding hers, they would begin another day together. Another day of the life they'd built, the love they'd nurtured, the partnership that had proven stronger than any challenge the territory could throw at them. Another day of being exactly what they'd always been meant to be, together.